So it looks like a lot of people are having trouble with exporting and creating movies for YouTube, Facebook, wherever. And this is kind of something that I know pretty well. And the problem is in an effort to make things easy, these companies have made things impossibly difficult to understand by giving you too many options. So I'm going to start with iMovie. So here is a movie in iMovie. This is really kind of technical. There's no way to get around it, but it's actually very simple, and there are only a handful or less than a handful of things you need to know. One of the things you need to know is what is the source? How did you shoot this? What did you shoot it in? Meaning, what is the resolution? And what is the frame rate? You often don't know what that is. So if you shot in an iPhone like this was set to reveal this in the Finder. So here's my original movie. If I double click on it, I know that this was 1920 by 1080, and there is a little window here that'll tell you what your original footage is. So to get to that window, you go to Window, and you show the Movie Inspector, right? Hello, Movie Inspector. So the Movie Inspector is going to tell me how this was made. So this was originated at H.264. I shot on my iPhone, 1920 by 1080, mono AAC, 41, blah, 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 blah. Interestingly, the frame rate it says is 2998, which is kind of bogus. I know that. The data size is not important. None of this stuff is really important. So what you really want to try to figure out is your settings. And it's funny, right? You go down this whole this world is all over the map, which is why so many people are confused. So your point is find out what your original footage is, find out the frame rate. It's telling me 2998, and at this stage we're good to go, not a problem. So let me close that. Let me go back to iMovie, and so I've put my story together, and now I want to export it here. And so which of these do I pick? What is the difference? The truth of the matter is there is actually no difference in any of these other than they changed the data rate. What does that mean? So when I do this, I never do this direct to YouTube, direct to Facebook, right? YouTube says, okay, I want to do this at 720p. It just kind of picked that number out of its backside, right? And it wants me to log in. So don't do that. And then let's see what Facebook wants. It also might be telling me this because I changed these earlier on, but it's posting to Facebook would be this way. And I definitely don't recommend doing that, right? Here's what I recommend doing. Like I said, this can be very, very simple. Export, you want to export to file. And exporting something to file means that you can then create what's referred to as a mezzanine file or a high quality compressed file that you can then post to Facebook, post to YouTube, post to wherever you want. It doesn't matter on that end at all. What does matter is this. So audio and video, obviously, my resolution. The resolution is kind of important in that you want to match the original size of your video, and hopefully you've moved that forward and your project is that size. Because iMovie is very basic and waters all that stuff down, I know that this stuff was shot at 1080. I know that my project is going to be 1080, so I therefore am going to pick 1080p, right? So again, this is the most important thing. They don't give you the option of changing the frame rate, which is good, right? We know our frame rate is going to be 2997. Now, what is the quality? Low, medium, high, best, custom. What does low means? It just does low. It doesn't actually tell you what those are going to be, but it's estimating the file size changes. They're getting bigger. And what that means, and you can't do ProRes because you can see ProRes is a super high quality for editing format, and it's not H.264, and it makes a very big file, which is 1 gigabyte. Because we're advanced folks here, we are going to do custom. This is your bit rate. This is where the rubber hits the road. This is the most important determinant of quality. And 20 is way too high. iTunes Exporter only allows you to do 3.3 at 1080p. Personally, I think that's still too high, but that's okay. We're going to go with it. If you don't know or understand, then just do 5 or 6. There's no difference. There's going to be very little visible difference from 3 to 5 to 23, and there's only, or whatever the max is. So why not do the max? Because you see, the max makes the file bigger, and it's not necessarily better. So this would be the equivalent of if you're going to have steak and potatoes and you want to serve it to people, you want to get a serving plate for people. You wouldn't put it on a platter, right? Because then you'd have your steak and potatoes floating around in a sea of ceramic dishware. So it's just wasteful, and then you put it all on the table, and everyone's eating steak and potatoes out of a platter, and then you're like, hey, where's he going with this? That's where I'm going with this. Don't waste bit rates. Don't waste. This is really, it really becomes important when you have to pay for stuff. But since we're not paying, let's just keep this thing at 5. It's going to be totally fine. It's not going to make it look any better. It's marginal. In fact, I seldom do higher than 3 even. I'll go as low as 1 where I'm allowed. So let's keep it at 5. Am I able to click on that? I'm not. I'm not going to get into better quality, which is faster quality, because those things do not mean what you think they mean. So let's hit next, and Taco 2, I'm going to put that on my desktop, and magically this is going to start encoding. And that's it. So now once you're done with this file, you can now upload it to YouTube, you can upload it to Facebook. It's the same thing. If you're not happy with the quality, then, there's not a lot that you can do. A lot of times if your footage is very not well lit, or if there's a lot of movement, you'll get that pixelization. And you can throw more bitrate at it, but it might not necessarily make it look better. So let's go now to our friend Adobe Premiere. And here's a timeline here. Same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and find a clip in here. Let's pick one of these clips. And I know for a fact, because I remember, but actually if I go to Info, the Info tab, I know for a fact that this was shot at 23,976, which is the frame rate, or 24. And it's 1920 by 1080, right? So here's a trick for creating a sequence. So you can mix and match resolutions and frame rates on your timeline, but here is the trick for creating a sequence that is the same resolution and frame rate of your footage. If you grab that footage, see, here's my mouse, and you bring it over to New, it creates a new sequence based on that footage, right? And that's it. So let's say I put this story together and I'm done. Now I want to come over here and export it. So I want to export my media. And here's where things get out of hand. Rightfully so. I don't blame you. This is terrible. This is just the nature of this world. By default, it wants to give you the format of QuickTime. This is crazy. All of this stuff is legacy, and no one uses the majority of any of these things, right? What is important, and this is where Adobe Premiere Elements is different than most. I'm not sure about. I have it in, and I might do another tutorial just for that, but it's very similar. I don't believe that they say H.264. They say F4V, which is Flash, H.264 video. Things used to be Flash video or FLVs, and so on and so forth. So you want to pick H.264 always and only, right? And you can see it already sort of adjusted the frame size. And then this is where things get crazy again. And that is these are all some version or variation of the same thing. And that is your frame size, your frame rate, and most importantly, like I said, your bit rate. All right. So these are all more or less the same. There's just some engineer that kind of puts them together to try to help you out, but they never go in and clean these things out, which is why they're crazy. So let's say in this case, I always create my own profile, but I'll sometimes start, and I'll do a follow-up and do a comparison of these, but I don't want to make this too long. So let's say I know that my video was 1080p, 23976. No, was it 23976? Okay. I'm going to pick that. So let's come back over here and focus on this area here. So you can see the frame rate is, or rather the frame size is 1920 by 1080. It's also very common to shoot at 1280 by 720. One isn't necessarily better or worse. And like I said, you want to make sure that you match. You want to be careful that you don't go up. So if you shoot at 720 by 1280 or 1280 by 720 and then output at this, it'll look acceptable, but the problem is you are scaling it up. And a comparison to that would be if you've ever drawn on a balloon that wasn't inflated and then you inflate it, you see that it all gets distorted. Conversely, if you draw on a balloon that's inflated and you take out the air, it gets super detailed and crisp and dense. It's easier and better to go down. It's harder to go up. So just be careful of that. If you know what the frame rate is, then go for it and match it. If you don't lose sleep over that. The frame rate, here's hey, another menu of awesome bunch of stuff I don't need. There's a dirty little secret, and that dirty little secret is this. 2397 and 24 are exactly the same. 2997 and 30 are the same, and 5994 and 60 are the same. Why do they have both of them? Well, they have both of them. These are all based on time and timing. Everything that you shoot is going to be 2397, 2997, or 60 or 5994 in an effort to make things easy for people. They're like, oh, let's simplify life and say, let's just say 24 or 30 or 60. That just makes things confusing. It doesn't really matter if you go 23 or 24. What does matter is that it matches your original video. For example, you don't want to have source at 24 and export it at 59 or 60 and convert, and the other way around, right? It works, you could do it, you might not notice the difference, but the difference is that's when things start to look stuttery and you might be watching a video and you're like, oh, why does this look weird, but I can't figure out what looks weird about it. It's all stair-steppy, or there's what's called a staccato effect. And it's because frame rates are not matched up, and that also means your shutter speed does not match your frame rate, but that's a video for another time. So, back to this video, 1920 1080, 1920 1080, 2397. Don't worry about this. These are just legacy again. The original MPEG encoder was baseline, main, and high. It's not going to make a huge difference other than these were smaller frame sizes and frame rates as opposed to these are newer ones. So I guess the equivalent of this high isn't going to make it better necessarily. It's like saying I'm going to eat a sandwich, but I'm going to put out my table with 10 forks for salad and all kinds of other stuff that I don't really need just to eat a sandwich for lunch. Again, I don't know if that analogy works. You're just putting out more stuff that you don't need, and it takes longer to encode. All right. So what is important? This right here is hyper critical and important. If you have the option, and we do here, but we don't in iMovie, you want to do 2-pass VBR. So you never use constant bitrate. I often or sometimes use 1-pass VBR because if I'm doing hour-long talks, I don't want to wait 8 hours to encode it. And it's not going to look that much better. But when you're doing short-form stuff, 2-pass VBR, which is variable bitrate, it'll do 1 pass to analyze your entire video, and then it'll do another pass to actually encode it. This right here is the key, right? So this is that number in iMovie. If you saw it, it went down to 3.5. Over here, we can go as low down as, this is actually 190 kilobits because it's presented in megabits right here, Mbps. I personally, I don't agree at all with YouTube's recommendations, and I can do a follow-up on that. I personally never, ever, ever go above 4 or 5. And if it's something that I'm paying for hosting, then I bring it down to 2 or 1. I sometimes even struggle with 2. And in this case, but because we're not paying for hosting and we don't really care, let's do 4, super max. You can barely tell the difference between 2 and 4, I guarantee it. And the maximum bitrate, which it basically says, well, there's going to be a point where I actually need to go beyond that 4 megabits for like a crazy scene, which isn't going to happen in your kitchen. But if it was like a football scene or leaves blowing, I might need to go higher. And then I say, well, I want it to go up to 6 or 8. That's going to make my file bigger, but suffice it to say that these settings, even if you did it at 4, you're like, oh, I don't actually care about the flower scene or the trees. I'm going to go with just this. That's fine. To recap, know what your source footage is, 1920 by 1080, and it tells you here. Try your hardest to match your source footage in frame size and frame rate. Otherwise, you get stair-steppy or staccato effect. And your bit rate is the key. This is the only thing that determines whether or not this is going to look great or not. If you can do 2-pass VBR, go for it. So let's talk about audio. So that was the video settings, audio settings. Again, this is my personal choice. I think that these numbers are completely insane, and I don't recommend them one bit. Depending on the footage, I will never go high. I sometimes go down to 64 if I'm just doing talking head stuff, but I never go higher than, say, 128. 96 is a great middle ground. If you're not paying for it, again, this is the same thing. Why not do 320? Well, because you don't actually need it. It's like serving a steak on a platter, same example. It only makes the file bigger, and it only takes longer to encode, although audio is kind of negligible. So let's go 128. And even further, I don't really do stereo. I'll do mono. Again, personal preference. I'm sure a lot of people are going to not be happy with my settings, but I don't actually care. So I've been doing this for 20 years and I know what's going down. So or unless you have a person, let's say you were doing you had a scene of someone on the right and someone on the left, or vice versa, and you wanted them to come out of the left speaker of your laptop or the right speaker of your laptop. That's where stereo, and you had 2 mics, that's where stereo becomes fun. But like I said, it's not, and you're listening on your laptop, so it's rare that you can kind of have that fun with audio production. So I'm going to keep it at stereo just to keep everyone happy. I'm going to go ahead and hit export and rock and roll. There it goes. So my taco video should be done. Here it is. And there, it's done. There's no audio, but if I go to the inspector, it shows me that the encoded file is H.264, 1920 by 1080. The frame rate is 2997, and the data rate is 5700 kilobits or 5.7 megabits. Yay, bitrate. Let's see how my other... Okay, this is done. I mean, it was super short. I don't know where I put it, though. Did I put it on the desktop? Let's do this again. Export, media. It put it in my project. Let me do it again on the desktop. And then export. This will be super fast. And if you had a bunch of these, so the other reason I should do a follow-up because this video is probably way too long already. But the other reason I like to do what I call that mezzanine file, which is that high-quality encoded file, is these presets here. Back in the day, and part of the reason they left them is back in the day, we had to encode for every single thing. And this is before the world of tablets and whatnot. So you had to create a high quality version, a low quality version, a medium quality version, a version for your iPod, a version for whatever and whatnot. So that's kind of the legacy here. But this is only here to intimidate you. It is completely meaningless and doesn't matter at all. What I just showed you is pretty much the key to exporting your video. I hope this helps. I hope it wasn't confusing. This stuff is definitely confusing, but just know that you need to know 3 or 4 things and you're good to go.